after totaling one of just 60 Bugattis ever made. Matt Armstrong was told the car could never be repaired outside the factory, but without certification or a backup plan, he tried anyway and brought it back to life, which raises the only question that matters. Bugatti wasn't going to sell him parts to rebuild this car. If Bugatti's own technician declared it a total loss, how did a man with no factory access, no manufacturer support, and a workshop and fix it? Join us as we find out how Matt Armstrong systematically dismantled the Bugatti CEO's argument about what's possible. But we just don't think it's safe, and that's why we can't support it. And on top of that, we don't think it's possible for you to do it without our help. You can't do that in a garage. When Matt went public, the stakes became serious. Alex Gonzalez had owned his purple Bugatti Chiron Per Sport for 3 weeks when he crashed it, a $6 million machine, one of only 60 ever manufactured, pushing 1,479 horsepower. 3 weeks later, he stood on a Florida highway watching every airbag hang out of the dashboard after a late-night collision with a 1987 Suzuki truck. The hood had peeled back, and the front end was completely destroyed. A Bugatti technician flew in from Molsheim, examined the wreckage, and gave his verdict on the spot. Total loss. Insurance paid out, and the car went to a Copart salvage auction in North Miami, where Alex did something nobody expected. He bought it back. Nearly $2 million, the most expensive vehicle Copart had ever sold. He parked it on his basketball court and started making calls. Bugatti gave him 2 options. First, a factory repair at $1.7 million just for parts with no ceiling on the final bill and a timeline stretching past 2 years. Second, a discounted deal, but only if Alex shipped the car back to France untouched and handed complete control to the factory. He said no to both. In October 2025, he called Matt Armstrong. When Matt flew out and saw the damage in person, the photographs hadn't prepared him for what he found. The engine had physically shifted inside the car. Coolant pipes were crushed flat, and the carbon structure had taken direct impacts. He saw all of it and said yes. 7 days after that visit, Bugatti locked the car's VIN. The restriction didn't physically shut down the vehicle. Instead, it operated through Bugatti's authorized parts distribution system, the same global network used by Volkswagen Group dealerships and certified repair centers. Once the VIN was flagged, any official order placed through that system would return blocked. Parts could no longer be purchased through normal channels, such as dealers or authorized suppliers. Independent workshops had no access to the internal ordering catalog without that clearance, effectively cutting off the supply route used for factory-correct repairs. In response, Alex went public. He gave Bugatti 24 hours to lift the lock, or he would 3D print every part the car needed. Mate Rematch, CEO of Bugatti, responded personally, describing the VIN lock as a safety measure and proposing a supervised collaboration. Bugatti briefly removed the blacklist. It didn't hold. Let's do a little bit of myth-busting today. There have been lots of talk online about Bugatti's service, repair, and maintenance costs, and most of what you hear is simply not true. Alex accused Mate of trying to control the car rather than support its legal owner. The lock came back. Then on January 16, 2026, Mate went public. He posted a video laying out exactly why he believed this rebuild was dangerous. The Chiron Per Sport carbon body was engineered for speeds above 260 miles per hour. A high-impact crash could hide structural damage inside the carbon fiber that was completely invisible from the outside. He broke down the safety systems, explained why a shared part number didn't mean shared function, and then said it plainly. This car was not safe to rebuild outside the factory. He would love to help, but doing so would not be the right thing to do. 3 days later, Matt responded. He understood the concerns. He wasn't looking for a fight, and he was going ahead regardless. Full personal responsibility, all warranty claims waived, no conditions attached. The CEO of Bugatti had just made his strongest public case. Matt heard every word of it and walked straight into the workshop. Mate said the damage inside was worse than anything visible from the outside. But did he actually know what Matt's team was about to find? I'm left with no choice but to give this a go myself. I don't have any special tools or special training. If we manage to pull this off, it will for sure be a huge achievement. to reach the damage buried inside the Chiron. Matt's team had to do the one thing Mate had specifically said required factory equipment, precision jigs, and a handful of specially trained technicians. They had to split the car in half. In factory conditions, separating and rejoining a Chiron's carbon monocoque is not a freeform teardown, but controlled structural operation carried out on dedicated alignment frames designed to keep suspension mounting points, drivetrain geometry, and chassis reference dimensions within exact tolerances. These fixtures exist to prevent even minor misalignment when the front and rear sections are separated, because the carbon tub and attached subframes must return to a precise load-bearing relationship when reassembled. Without these reference systems in place, every measurement during disassembly and reassembly has to be manually replicated to maintain factory-level geometry across the entire chassis. Splitting the monocoque meant disconnecting the coolant lines, the hydraulics, the complete brake circuit, the entire wiring loom, and the props half in the correct sequence, one step at a time, because a single mistake in that order could destroy components that were already impossible to source with the VIN active. After Alex crashed his Bugatti, he nominated Matt to repair it. Start getting your flights, mate. And that challenge had become increasingly difficult as Bugatti refused to sell him parts. They removed 14 titanium bolts and disconnected every system. When the two halves of a $6 million hypercar slowly came apart for the first time outside a factory setting, the team needed something to hold the rear sections weight steady. They used the wheelbase of a workshop bin, a car that Bugatti CEO had gone on camera to say could only be handled in Molsheim, was now resting on a bin trolley in a private UK garage. It looked like it shouldn't work, but it worked. What was inside was worse than the outside had suggested. The cast aluminum bracket connecting the engine to the gearbox had snapped entirely in two, both pieces sitting apart from each other in the engine bay. The gearbox housing had cracked on both sides. The engine itself had been physically pushed forward by the impact force and had only stopped moving because the props half pressed into the billet aluminum, a detail that probably prevented the drivetrain damage from being catastrophic. Coolant pipes throughout the engine bay were crushed flat, and the carbon tub showed visible dents from direct impact. By late February 2026, the car was stripped to its core, panels off, systems disconnected, parts laid out across the workshop floor. So our first step is to start by removing the rear quarters, which are hopefully covering over the bolts which separate the back end of the car from the front. Matt published a split video on February 8th, and it pulled 11 million views. Some viewers saw it as proof that manufacturers have been overstating what independent repair couldn't achieve. Others pointed out that no third-party structural inspection had been published, that the rebuild was proceeding without external verification, and that you couldn't fully assess a carbon monocoque at this impact level just by looking at it. Both positions had weight. Beneath all of that was a single practical problem that neither side was talking about loudly enough. The bracket. The cast aluminum bracket that connected the engine to the gearbox was in two pieces on a workshop bench. No replacement existed anywhere in the supply chain. No, manufacturer was willing to machine a new one, and if it couldn't be repaired, the car wasn't delayed. It was finished permanently. Mate had built his case around structural safety and factory expertise. What he hadn't addressed was this: a broken piece of metal sitting in a private workshop, and a man who wasn't ready to accept that it couldn't be fixed. Almost nobody had ever heard of the man Matt called Next. The only piece that could save this project was in two halves on a bench, and the man being asked to weld it had never touched a Bugatti in his life. Now, one thing Bugatti didn't think we were able to do is separate the front end of the car from the rear. There's only two places in the world that can do it, and today we need to make sure there's three. The most important weld nobody has ever heard of. His name was Bob. He was not a Bugatti technician or someone with a manufacturer credential to his name, just a specialist machinist Matt had found through his own network, working out of a workshop with no notable name above the door. What he brought to the job was precision, patience, and a willingness to take on work that most people in his position would decline the moment they saw what the metal was made of. Matt sat in the bracket. The material was the first serious obstacle. The bracket was cast from a magnesium-rich aluminum alloy, the kind of metal that doesn't bend under stress. It cracks. Under welding heat, it behaves unpredictably. One wrong move, and it doesn't fuse. It fractures further. There was no spare bracket donor car or manufacturer willing to machine a replacement. The broken piece Matt sent to Bob was the only one available for this project. If Bob got it wrong, the rebuild didn't pause. It ended. Bob studied the alloy's composition before touching it and confirmed the weld was achievable. Then he cleaned both fracture faces until they aligned without a gap, without offset, with the contact line running clean along the full break. Then he welded it. It held. Matt later called it the make-or-break moment of the entire project. A machinist in an ordinary workshop had just repaired a component that a billion-dollar manufacturer had decided couldn't be fixed outside its own facility. You can't do that in a garage. There's just a few places in the world with the right equipment, and only a few people in the world with the right training to be able to do that. While Bob was working, the rest of the team kept moving. The factory exhaust was pulled off and sent for 3D scanning, so a custom replacement could be designed around the car's actual geometry. Matt ordered the new system from Valvetronic, a specialist in aftermarket exhaust builds. The stock Chiron is deliberately quiet, engineered down to a level that doesn't reflect what a 1,500 horsepower W16 actually produces. The Valvetronic build was going to change that using a custom 2-in-2/6 X-pipe configuration. Before a single piece of metal was cut, the team built the full exhaust layout in 3D printed templates, checking every measurement and clearance point against the car physically. Coolant lines crushed in the crash were remade in-house. A pinched overflow pipe was repaired using rigid brake hose. Damaged body panels were rebuilt through a combination of repair work and 3D printing, and the front-end wiring was stripped and reconstructed from scratch. The windscreen and both headlights, components Bugatti's lock had removed from the supply chain, were tracked down by cross-referencing Volkswagen Group part numbers across other vehicles in the same manufacturer family. That process had quietly surfaced something that complicated Bugatti's public position. Beyond that chassis number, Bugatti will not supply any component through a dealership. Not every component inside the Chiron was exclusive to Bugatti. Sensors, fittings, and smaller components throughout the car carried Volkswagen Group part numbers, the same numbers appearing on Audis and other vehicles in the same manufacturer family. Made had addressed this in his video correctly, explaining that shared numbers didn't mean shared function. That argument was technically sound. But once those numbers became publicly visible, the claim that only Molsheim could service this car became harder to sustain in full. Each component across the entire vehicle was identified, sourced, fabricated, or repaired individually, one at a time, without manufacturer assistance, without an official parts catalog, and without a single Bugatti dealer filling a single order. The bracket came back from Bob. It went into the car first. Now came the moment that would determine whether any of this had been worth it, because joining two halves of a split carbon monocoque without factory jigs is an entirely different problem from taking them apart. The bracket was back in place. The parts were ready. And the two halves of the monocoque were about to come back together with no factory equipment and no room for error. There's oil. Look, there's oil coming from it. All here, all dripping on there. Oh, okay. This just got a lot worse. We're going to have to take the engine out of a Chiron. Bringing two halves back together without a single Bugatti tool meant solving problems of factory equipment had always prevented. Splitting the monocoque had been methodical and controlled. Rejoining it was harder and more uncertain. The two sections had come back together with enough precision, without factory jigs, manufacturer alignment tools, or official fixtures of any kind, so that every system reconnecting across the joint would sit correctly and the structural relationship between front and rear would hold under the forces this car generates. Steering geometry, suspension loading, drivetrain alignment. A few millimeters of deviation at that joint is not a cosmetic problem. At 250 miles per hour, it becomes a structural failure. The team brought the sections together slowly by hand, checking alignment throughout. The 14 titanium bolts went back in. One had snapped during the original teardown and had been replaced through a specialist supplier. Matt flagged something on camera, worth noting. Titanium bolts require anti-seize compound on installation. Skip it and they lock permanently under torque. Try to remove them later and the surrounding material comes with them. On a car that had already been split once, that detail had direct consequences. With the structure secured, The coolant lines went back in, then the hydraulics, the brakes, the full wiring loom, and the props shaft. The Valvetronic exhaust was guided into position using the 3D printed templates built during fabrication. Every measurement pre-confirmed. Every clearance verified against the car's actual geometry. On March 3rd, 2026, Matt flew to Miami carrying the finished exhaust system. The car that had arrived as a certified write-off, stripped to its core, monocoque split, bracket in two pieces, was now a single assembled vehicle again. And finally, it's looking like most of the parts are connected from the rear of the car to the front. The build had attracted attention beyond the automotive world. Voxel Matters, a publication covering additive manufacturing, had reported that the project was being referenced in industry discussions about what independent workshops could now achieve using CNC machining and 3D printing without any manufacturer involvement. The bracket repair and the exhaust routing templates were both cited as specific examples. Bugatti's parts access policy drew comparisons to the frameworks used by John Deere and Apple, both of which had built legal structures limiting third-party repair access in ways that directed owners back toward official service channels. Matt was not sued, and no regulator intervened. The legal question of whether owning a car extended to the right to independently repair remained unanswered. A week after the exhaust video, a viewer watching in 4K spotted something on the gearbox housing. A hairline crack, exactly the kind of damage the original Copart listing had flagged. The clip spread fast. People who had followed every step of the build suddenly weren't sure what they were looking at. Matt pulled up the footage and ran his finger across the mark on the camera. It was paint over spray from the original crash, not a structural issue. The car was sound, but for about 48 hours, nobody had known that, and the uncertainty had been real. Everything was in place. The car was whole, the exhaust was fitted, and the key was in Matt's hand. The only question remaining was whether the W16 was actually going to start. After months of fabrication, welding, and rebuilding without a single Bugatti part, the moment the entire project came down to a second away. Get it started. If it runs good, then we get a few reps. Big moment. Oh my God. Please start. Please start. Yeah. Whoa. Stop. The Bugatti CEO was in the comments section. March 8th, 2026. Fluids topped up. Car on its wheels. Key in the ignition. The W16 fired instantly. The engine started on first attempt with no hesitation, no rough idle, no warning lights, no fault codes. It settled into a clean, stable idle. Then the exhaust opened up. The stock Chiron is deliberately quiet, engineered to be damped and controlled regardless of what the W16 is capable of producing. The Valvetronic system removed all of that. What came through was deeper, harder, and more aggressive than anything Bugatti had shipped from Molsheim. It didn't sound like a restored car. It sounded like a different machine entirely. Matt put it in gear, and the car rolled forward, then back under its own power for the first time since the Suzuki truck had taken the front end off it on a Florida highway. A fuel leak appeared, was spotted immediately, fixed on the spot, and shown on camera without a cut, the same way every problem on this build had been handled from the beginning. The comments flooded in, focused on the exhaust note, the bracket weld, and the clean engine star on a car that had been written off by the manufacturer's own technician. And somewhere in those comments was mate Rematch, the CEO of Bugatti. He had watched every step of it. So if it fits on the same bolts and you put in the turbo in the Chiron now, just because it has the same Audi part, and then someone just puts random leather over it, it's really dangerous. He had posted his public safety video, maintained a VIN lock, and kept his factory-only position throughout. Then he had watched the bin trolley hold the monocoque. He had watched an unknown machinist weld a bracket his factory wouldn't touch. He had watched two carbon sections rejoined by hand, without factory alignment tools. He had watched the W16 fire with no fault codes. And he had read the same comments the rest of the world was reading. The car still wasn't finished. The bodywork needed work. The interior was stripped. It hadn't been road tested, and it had no registration. But it was running. Every specific claim Mate had made about what could not be done outside his factory had been answered by a man who had never worked on a Bugatti before this project began. While Mate was processing what he had just watched, Matt had already quietly bought a second Bugatti, and the fix that got it moving had cost almost nothing. Matt had just restarted one Bugatti that Bugatti had written off. So why had he already bought another one while the first